And the suits are relatively the same, even though the seams might be laser put together, and maybe the materials are a little bit more buoyant and perhaps a little bit less drag, but there's still a drag factor that you needed to, according to that examination of long suits, you had to swim 6.5 miles an hour to break the drag coefficient. At that time, based on time swum 8 years ago, that amounted to about 10 people that swam the 50-meter freestyle. Anything that's longer than that is at a compromise for the fact that the suit has a drag factor. Point in case, Michael didn't swim in that suit, the full-length suit, when he swam the 400 IM. He swam in one that basically was from his waist to his knees. So it's event-specific, and I've said this sort of like tongue-in-cheek, that if it had hair on that suit, Michael would still break world records and everybody else would get in the same type of suit. And I broke my first world record in the first 4 of my life, and I wore 2 swimming suits, so I don't really think it's really the swimming suit. And if it was the swimming suit, then I'm buying Tiger Woods golf clubs, because it means that it doesn't matter who the swinger is, I'm going to be able to score like that. So I think if we just think about this seriously, I think that it looks great, and I think that there is some factor about that it takes care of ripples and this and that, and it would probably have a greater effect on me putting the suit on currently than it would to have somebody that's now the athletes that we're watching out there that have like 1% body fat and they're totally toned and what have you. Plus I understand they rip, so I wouldn't want to risk that.
Mark, Michael's talked a little bit about having Ryan Lochte push him so much, and obviously we got to see that in the first day in the 400 IM. Can you talk a little bit from the experience of having been so far ahead of a field and what it's like to have another swimmer there just to push you and keep you a little bit sharper when you're so much further ahead of everyone else?
Well, you can't win a race unless there's somebody else in the pool with you. Otherwise, it's considered an exhibition. And I think that those people that you're talking about push Michael to greatness. And on any given day, I always felt that I could have been beaten if I wasn't really concentrating on my game. So I think that personally, those that are in the race with Michael, those few that are in the race with Michael, certainly didn't wake up to a low expectation of themselves, and that they went out in the morning and said, boy, I hope I lose. I think that they all have the same attitude that they want to win, and I also think that in some certain circumstances, in some events that he will swim in, that if in fact Michael doesn't focus and stay focused, that he could be beaten. But then on the other hand, Michael can not stay focused by maybe an extra 20% and still win. So the question is he not going to stay focused for 30 or 40%? Who pushed me? Well, when I regained the world record in the 200-meter butterfly, I did it by 100th of a second, and that was Gary Hall, as in Gary Hall Sr., not Jr. And he was always right there. I had a guy by the name of Jerry Heidenreich that was right on top of me in the freestyle events. And I worried about Roland Mathis, who was the world record holder in the 100 and the 200-meter backstroke, that at one time had swum within a couple tenths of a second a butterfly swim that if, he never did it while I was in the same race with him, but he had done it in some place in East Germany where he was from. So I was always worried about somebody, yes.
Vicki. Back here again. Given your view on the suit, how do you account for all the world records being set, last year, this year? What do you think is the explanation?
I think they would have set them anyway. I mean, the year before the Olympics and then the Olympics is a time when somebody says to themselves, I'm not going to have another shot at this, and that I'm really going to focus on the fact that there's not going to be another July 4th that I can work out, or another July 4th that I'm going to be able to swim in a meet, and therefore I need to really, focus on the fact that I can't stop fooling myself. I've got to really concentrate on putting in honest workouts and tapering properly and be rested and watch my health, watch what I eat, and because I'm starting to get closer to the time that the Olympics is approaching, and I want to be the best that I can, and I want to start a year ahead of time. So I think this is just a natural progression that I think if you chart, swimming is not like box scores in baseball, but I think if you go back and you chart the history of times and world records broken, they seem to escalate about a year before the games and during the year of the games for that reason. And I think it's predicated on the training and the coaching and the athlete, and not so much the equipment. We don't. It's not like snow skiing where we have different kinds of skis, and if you choose the wrong ski and you put the wrong wax on it, and you have the wrong guy that does the what do you call it, the sharpening, and you don't have the right goggles on, and if you went down third on the hill, it's better than if you went 15th on the hill. We're pretty on a common ground here in the swimming pool. It's the same whether you're in heat 1 or heat 5, lane 1 or lane 4. And I just think that it's more that the swimmer has to take the credit for what he does than his equipment. Mind you that I didn't swim, and it wasn't. We couldn't swim in goggles because they were not allowed in my day. We could swim with caps, but obviously I didn't. And I had long hair, and I had a nylon swimsuit that wasn't stretchy and all that sort of stuff. And I dealt with it just perfectly fine, and never attributed to the fact that if I had a different suit on, I might have gone faster.
Mark?
Yeah.
Do you see any of yourself in Phelps?
You know, I see that there's a tremendous similarity in as much as that of his experience level going from one Olympics to the next, that he's won commandedly in the events that he is now going to participate in over the rest of the world. And it's quite difficult to imagine that one of his competitors can think that on any given day now going forward that that's going to be his day, because if in the past 5 times that they've gotten up and raced against him, they've been beaten by him, and even in light of the fact that you not only do your best time and you break his old world record, you're still looking at his feet, I think that's a little bit demoralizing to think that things could change in 4 weeks from now. I would assume that that's what Michael's thinking also. Because when he wakes up in the morning, he has to take each day one day at a time. And he's got to say to himself, my very first event, I start rested like the other 7 that I'm going to compete against in the individual medley, the 400. And like when I swam my first event, the 200-meter butterfly, I said, this is a great way to start and to prove to myself that I've rested properly, that I've tapered properly, that I'm ready to go. And of course, he has an additional 7 more events that he can enter in to prove that once he gets into his winning ways. And those that sit around on day number 4 or day number 5, who only have one event, start to second guess whether or not they've rested properly, or whether or not they've tapered properly, and whether or not they're ready to go. And it makes it really difficult for his competitors to get psyched up to think that they can stop this momentum. And I see that there's an exact similarity in not only his program, although he's not swimming the same events, some of them are the same. The effectiveness of what he's going to do is going to have the same on his competitor, and that's to his advantage. And so from that point of view, I would say that I'm not a betting man, and I'm not going to wager a bet in Las Vegas on this, but if I had to handicap his chances of winning his events, I see it in 3 different areas that he would run up against as a difficulty. One is the very first event, because you need to get off, obviously, with a win on the very first event. And the 400 individual medley is quite an arduous race, to say the least. I would say that he has no control of the relays or what will happen. He'll only participate as one of the members. So there's always the risk of somebody false starting, or the team that tries to place them in the finals maybe doesn't get there. Who knows? I mean, you just don't, and you don't know how well the other countries are going to respond to swimming relays, because anything can happen. And the third thing is whether or not he, in the only event that he doesn't hold the world record in, which is the 100-meter butterfly, can continue his winning ways. I think at the Worlds he won by hundredths of a second, and I watched him win by 1/100th of a second when I was there in Athens. And if you know that that's the way you have to win a gold medal, and it's well into his program, that probably may be one of his most difficult races that he'll have to swim to be able to accomplish what he wants to do. And I think that if I think back on my career, I also had a race that was of similar nature, and that my most difficult race was the 100-meter freestyle, because my margin of winning was the least. Although I won by more than 100th, I'm sure that he thinks about that. I mean, at least I would if I were him, but I'm not.
Dan.
Mark, how do you think you will feel if he does break your record for 7 golds in an Olympics?
I think this is a marvelous time for Michael Phelps, and I'm hoping that he embraces this opportunity and relishes it, because I know that I personally did that when I went to Munich, and I really felt comfortable and confident that I was going to have my day because of the results that I was able to achieve at the Olympic trials. And I think that when we look at what Michael will achieve here by the end of this week, and then be in that same situation that he was in 4 years ago, to be able to compete in the events that he will compete in, I think that it's marvelous for not only him, I think it's great for the sport of swimming, it's certainly great for the Olympic movement, and NBC's got to thank him immensely because he's their meal ticket the first week of competition. All that being said, I think it's about time that somebody else takes the responsibility, and I'm happy to pass the baton of my legacy onto somebody that I know I'm sure I've inspired. And there's nothing bad about that, it's only positive. So in one sense, I'm saying to myself, hey, it's okay, records are made to be broken, including mine. 36 years is a long time. I would have never thought that I'd be sitting here if somebody could have said, what do you think you'll be doing in the year 2008? And as a matter of fact, it just dawned on me that it was 40 years ago that I was in my first Olympics, and I was at training camp, and I'm going, wow, that's almost as twice as old as Michael Phelps as a go. So, I mean, it's like, wow, I swam a long time ago. It's okay. Really, it's okay. And I'm happy with it, to be honest with you. I mean, you know, if he doesn't do it, then it was meant not to be. And that doesn't take away from his greatness. And I can unequivocally say that, you know, he's showing a different kind of courage than perhaps I did. I was not chasing Mark Spitz's record. I was chasing somebody's record named Don Scholander and Jesse Owens that had 4 gold medals. And so when I came up with a program of 7, it seemed to be sort of almost ridiculously invented by myself, and I had a lot of naysayers. But when I think about, you know, Michael not only swimming events that he not only holds the world record in, but also challenging himself to events that he's the 2nd or 3rd fastest in the world. And seeing whether or not he can become a world record holder in that event, and perhaps putting it into his program, that's more than I did. And I never looked that far. But I think it's grand that he does that. And because he did that, I think one of his greatest races to date was getting 3rd in the 200 freestyle in the Olympic Games in Athens, because that's why he's the world record holder now in that event. And that's why he will win that event in Beijing. And that's why he's now even more capable of winning 7 or 8 gold medals, and it's great. And you can't take that away from him. And it doesn't take away from me, so that's the way I feel about it.
Henry.
Right. Mark, we've seen with the money in the sport today that people are able to stay in the sport longer and compete longer. Do you think if you had had those opportunities, you would have still been competing in 76 or beyond, and do you regret that you didn't get that chance?
Very good question. If you take, and I've been asked this question before, and it's hard to conjecture as to maybe what I would have thought. And obviously, I had no choice in the matter to retire because I did take money. And at that point in time, where was I going to go? 7 gold medals seemed to be a nice time to hang my suit up. But had I had the opportunity, as you put it, to be able to continue in my sport and make money like the athletes are able to do today, then it would have certainly been in my best interest on behalf of my sponsors to continue in the sport, and certainly I would have gone to Montreal. I mean, at that point in time, I would have only been 26 years old, but I'm convinced that I would not have probably attempted to swim in as many events. I think I would have drawn back to the events that relatively would have seemed easier for me, which probably would have been the butterfly events, because those are the ones that I won by the greatest margin. I probably would have swum some of the freestyle events to qualify myself for relays, and may or may not have elected to actually bow out of the individual event, simply because it may have compromised, for an example, my ability to win a gold medal. And Michael did exactly that when he got 2nd, I believe, in the prelims of the 100 to get himself on the relay. Could have probably more than likely made it as an individual event, but at compromise to some of his other events. So who knows? I mean, you know, in retrospect now, that would have been a great thing. And my wife said, boy, it's too bad you couldn't swim again, because then, you know, the total number of medals that you won would be higher and be more difficult. But, you know, you don't think like that when you're 22 years old, and I never had that as an option. I think that the one thing that I regret that probably I could have done something about is that we had the 50 freestyle at the collegiate level. It was not an event at that time at the Olympics. It would have been extremely complimentary to my program, and who knows, I might have got a medal in it. And in my wishful thinking, it might have been a gold one. But relatively speaking, there was more chance of that happening, that they would put that event in, than at the time allowing us to make money. But it's good for the sport that they've been able to make money so they can stay in it. And had the rules been the same today as they were yesterday for me, I don't think Michael would be swimming now, because he would have taken the money opportunities that certainly were showered on him from his success in Athens, and then he would have been categorically denied to continue in the sport. So from that point of view, the money has been grateful and gracious to him and to the sport that we've been able to watch him swim. And this is going to be history. He's going to do, as we say, a little schooling to the rest of the world, and it's going to be exciting for those that will see it in person and for the watch it on TV.
Eric?
What's the most physically difficult or overall difficult thing about so many events, doing so many events in so few days?
It's not difficult for Michael, and it wasn't difficult for me because we trained for it, but I think it's to stay focused. And I honestly, once or twice when I was walking out in a trance to go swim in the finals at the Olympics, I was going, is this the 100 fly or is this the 200 free? I mean, of course I knew what it was, because all I had to do was look up the board and notice that it was the 200 freestyle, because I could see that's what it was. But, you know, it's funny, it's as strange as it may seem, because when you wake up in the morning, your training, your warm-up is all predicated on what you do ceremonially for that race. I think that's difficult to stay focused, and it's for 8 days. It gets a little easier, because for me, every race that I won was an event that I never had to swim against the rest of my life. So I really thought that they were taking bricks off of my back and the load was easier. And I think that Michael will probably think the same thing as each day goes by. Whoa. You know, I personally think that he's not thinking about 7 gold medals or 8 gold medals. He's taking one day at a time. He's going to be honest with himself. He's going to say, I want to swim the best race of my life. I've never been better in my life. I'm focused. I'm tapered. Everything is just working well. I may never ever get a chance at swimming this event again. Who knows? And I want to go out with the best race that I can swim on that day. And over 6 or 7 or 8 days, you're going to hopefully see that happen day after day. And he'll come away with something that'll be phenomenal. You know, it'll be very interesting.
Do you have any other questions? This will be our last question. We got to get Mark to a radio interview.
I wasn't as pretty. I didn't have one of those nice looking swimsuits on. You know, it's phenomenal. She never really left the sport for 17 years like I did, and she's just a unique person in that regard, to be able to maintain a level of fast twitch muscles to do what she does. I got to tell you an interesting story. I don't know if I should tell this, but it's nothing that's bad. It's just a fact. When I was sitting in Sydney, Australia, watching the Olympics, there were 2 races that were ties to the 100th of a second. And they now, when you tie to a 100th of a second, you get a tie. But there was something that was similar that happened to that regard in one of the individual medley races in Munich, where they tied to the 100th and then they had to go to the 1,000th of a second to determine the winner. And a guy by the name of, I think it was Tim McKee, wound up tying with Gunnar Larsson to the 100th, but then there was no rules and precedent set that they had to go to the 1,000th of a second. So when I was sitting in the stands and Dora tied with Jenny Thompson in one of her races, I turned to the person that I was sitting next to, which I'll keep anonymous, that knew what I knew, and I said, well, you know who won, didn't you? And they said, yeah, of course I did. I told Dara who the winner was in that tie. It's not sorted alphabetically. When a tie occurs to the 100th of a second, the board doesn't know alphabet. It knows to sort to the 1,000th by time. So whoever was on top in the tie is the winner. I'll let you go back to the books and decide who won.
Dan.
I'm sure she's thinking about that.
Mark,
Matt.
there's a new book out on, an autobiography on you. I was wondering if you could talk about your level of cooperation with the book and what you thought of it.
Hundreds of hours, let's put it that way. And all the stories came from me initially. It's an interesting book from the point of view that it doesn't really address, I mean, it addresses this in sort of a real light way about winning 7 gold medals. It was the journey for the 8 days of every day swimming in an event. And it's sort of like walking down a journey of your life. Like, I mean, this is not exactly this way, but it's sort of like you walk down an aisle like you guys are all seated here, and if I came from the back and I walked down the aisle towards this dais here, and I looked to my left and I looked to my right, and I noticed that this may have been the first event on the first day, and I noticed all of my competitors sitting there. And then all of a sudden the book flashes, not on me, but the competitors and their stories of how they really honestly believed that they could beat me. And it examines the possibilities of what if. And there's a lot of what ifs that are very accurate in the minds of those that Rich Foster, who happens to be my attorney, who is the author of the book, examined. And one example of this is in the 200-meter freestyle with Steve Genter, that he had a punctured lung, and it goes and talks about him being in the hospital and the likelihood of him not even being able to swim. And he comes out of hospital to swim, and at the 100-meter mark, he was ahead of me. I mean, so you just don't know. And it's from that point of view, it's the embracing of the stories of the people that I competed against and their story about what it was like to compete against me. And we found that was more of an interesting story to talk about than the obvious of what I did. And the likelihood of how difficult it is to take that journey that I did and really be successful, because there's so many things that had to go right with my story and each one of my events, and there's so many things that had to possibly go wrong with somebody else. So they didn't get that one flash of the greatest swim of their life to beat me. And it's kind of scary when you think about it, because it could have happened in any one of the events.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, everyone.